Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we look at what's really going on in the world of the BRICS. Now, my name is Rod Mackenzie, and today I want to talk about that. On early Monday morning, Vladimir Putin proposed the resumption of talks on a peaceful resolution of the conflict to take place in Istanbul. His initiative is met with approval by both Donald Trump and Tayyip Erdogan. So what is the proposal based on, and why does it make the ultimatums issued by the European coalition of the so-called willing to Russia seem unreasonable? Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed to initiate the negotiations with the Ukraine on May 15th in the city of Istanbul, where previous negotiations had taken place and where the talks finally halted back in 2022. Now, the Russian head of state emphasized that Moscow's never actually refused to engage in dialogue with Ukraine, and it's willing to consider a ceasefire if the dialogue is actually resumed. Now, Putin asserts that negotiations should address the underlying causes of the conflict and establish a foundation for long-term lasting peace with a historical perspective. He says, our proposals remain under consideration, I think. Now, the decision now rests with the Ukrainian authorities and their masters, who seemingly are guided by their personal political ambitions rather than the interests of the people. And they seem set on perpetuating the war with Russia through the actions of the Ukrainian nationalists. Now, the Russian president's initiative has been positively received internationally. Now, during a telephone conversation with President Putin, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced his intention to provide the Istanbul platform as the meeting place. He stated that the Turkish side is committed to providing comprehensive support for the organisation and the facilitation of negotiations with the objective of achieving a sustainable peace. The US president also spoke in a positive way. In his post on the Truth Social network, he wrote, "This is a potentially significant day for Russia and the Ukraine." And the White House had also stated that the end of the conflict could save hundreds of thousands of lives. He also said that he's confident the result could be a whole and newly significantly improved world. Plus, analysts highlight Putin's references to statements made by the European leaders who attempted to communicate with Russia in a boorish manner with ultimatums. This could be the joint statement by the coalition of the willing, represented by the presidents or the heads of France, Britain, Germany, Poland and Ukraine, where the parties call for a 30-day ceasefire beginning on the May 12th. The coalition of the willing is made up of Macron of France, Merz of Germany, Tusk of Poland and Sir Wayne Keir Starmer of not-so-great Britain. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and my website, SCOBRICSinsight.com, to further develop them. You can do this by making a small donation, which you can do by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen. Now, everybody who does donate gets a personal thank you from me, and I'm thanking you all now just for watching, because every view is important to me. And do keep the comments coming. I do love to read them and I do love to respond to them. Now, furthermore, this coalition of the willing have threatened tougher sanctions on Russia's banking and energy sectors should Moscow refuse to support a full ceasefire. Do these clowns not understand that the previous 30,000 sanctions failed to dent Russia but actually destroyed Europe's economies? Now, the new measures are expected to target fossil fuels, oil and the shadow tanker fleet, but as usual, they'll be totally ineffective. Now, Zelensky subsequently restated his position. The Kiev cokehead outlined the conditions for talks. However, Moscow, as usual, remains highly sceptical of any proposals coming from the Kiev cokehead. Now, in his late-night statement, Putin recalled that Russia had previously repeatedly put forward initiatives for a ceasefire, but these initiatives were sabotaged time and time again by the Ukrainians, including during the visit of foreign guests to Moscow for the 80th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War victory. Now, I would like to reiterate that Russia is prepared to engage in negotiations without any preconditions, and we hereby propose the resumption of negotiations that were previously interrupted by third parties. I think he's talking about Boris Johnson there. I mean, this proposal is made in the context of ongoing military actions. So what are the issues with this approach? And those who genuinely aspire for peace cannot in all consciousness fail to lend their support to this initiative, the Russian president emphasised. Now, the last time negotiations were held in Istanbul, so therefore resuming the dialogue in that city seems logical given Moscow's position, the formula of which is Stanislav Thanchenko, who's head of the international relations at St. Petersburg University. He's also a member of the prestigious Valdai Club. He believes that the Istanbul Agreement should be taken into account on the realities on the ground. Now, by the way, the last times the Istanbul agreements were scuppered by Boris the Clown Johnson on behalf of the Biden administration. Furthermore, since 2022, Moscow has been adopting a systematic approach to resolving the Ukrainian crisis. As was the case 3 years ago, Russia's prepared to initiate peace negotiations, taking into account the developments that they've looked at on the front line. However, Tachenko acknowledges that diplomatic dialogue on the Ukraine is not the only option that the Russians have. I mean, it's worth noting that Trump in his nightly address did not actually address the European leaders directly, probably because he treats them with contempt. He did state, however, that attempting to communicate with Russia and its people in a seriously disrespectful and discourteous manner using language of ultimatums is not acceptable. I mean, Putin says, we reject their threats as meaningless because they're pointless and they can't do anything. In other words, Europe is being reduced to a barking chihuahua, according to analysts. Now, the German political scientist Alexander Rahr has stated that the selection of Istanbul as a location for the resumption of negotiation was not an arbitrary decision. I mean, Moscow has made it clear it's ready to continue the dialogue of April 2022, but when the British clown Boris Johnson, on behalf of the Biden admin, forced Zelensky to abandon negotiations and to continue the war against Russia, he explains. That said, however, the Europeans understand perfectly well that the Ukraine is losing badly and it cannot win. But they're more concerned about their own failure and they don't want to admit it. They want to continue for as long as possible to avoid the up-and-coming humiliation. I mean, Europe's attempting to show strength and resolve through the issuance of ultimatums and the threat of sanctions while trying to align itself with Trump's policy. I mean, they're also attempting to exert pressure on the US and Trump to align with their position, but ultimately they're going to have to do whatever the US president's stance is, and he thinks that the resumption of the Istanbul process is the one that he supports. He's actually said that he will try and, if necessary, turn up in Istanbul on Thursday. So Trump's approach towards the European Union has always been characterised by a lack of concern. He's motivated by a desire to become a prominent peacemaker in Ukraine, the Palestine and the Indo-Pakistani conflict. Now, Konstantin Dolgov, who's a presidential advisor and has actually been involved in negotiations, he said the President of Russia has stated our position has remained unchanged for the past 3 years. Russia's determined to continue the dialogue on the same basis, but they have to take into account the changed realities on the ground. As the President said, if there are negotiations, we can consider some options for a truce. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that the previously agreed on accords, the energy truce, the Easter truce and the ceasefire in honour of Victory Day have not been honoured by the Ukrainian side or its armed forces. So regardless, the West and Kiev are now urgently seeking a response to Putin's statements. I mean, it's evident that Russia's opponents were not expecting or were not even prepared for such a comeback from Putin. he's caught them on the hop again. I mean, they placed their bets on having a continuation of the conflict, even at the suggestion of a 30-day ceasefire was merely a strategy to grant the Ukraine armed forces a temporary respite from the beating up that they were getting. Now, it's important to note that the text of the 2022 Istanbul Agreement, which was actually initialed by the Ukrainian authorities, is not the final version of the agreements, and it's not going to be. Rather, it's now a foundation for the subsequent negotiations, such as the winning party in the conflict, as Russia is entitled to determine at the time and the venue for negotiations, which will serve as a test for the Ukrainian side. Will it actually behave, or will Kiev cokehead get out of his pram again? I mean, should the Kiev authorities, at the behest of the coalition of the willing, choose to decline negotiations and skip the meeting, they will forfeit their moral right to engage in discussions concerning the pursuit of peace. Now, in the current conditions, it's also vital that Russia retains the initiative, not only on the battlefield, but in diplomacy. Though the results of the 80th anniversary are victory celebrations and 4 days of intensive negotiations with high-level foreign delegations representing the sovereign states of around the world, from Europe, Central Asia and the global south, demonstrate that it's evident to all observers that Russia is on the right side of history. Its position on this matter is clear, and it would prefer a diplomatic way to resolve the conflict. But if their opponents are not ready for it, then the special military operation is going to continue. If the Ukrainian authorities, at the behest of the European nations, wish to continue this course of action, then that is their prerogative, Dogov concluded. But we will see. Anyway, so let us see. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like, share and subscribe. And if you want to help me out, please click on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen and make a donation. I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.